Everyone, once again, my name is Salam Fatayer. I am an audio producer here at Radio Milwaukee. Brian, if you would like to go.
Hi, my name is Brian Peters. I'm the Community Access and Policy Specialist at Independence First.
And then Tara.
I do a lot of advocacy work and fee-for-service and accessibility assessments.
Thank you. And if Tara, if you would like to introduce yourself as well.
My name is Tara Cater-Vorpal. I'm a sign language interpreter. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Harvey?
Hi, I'm Harvey Ross. I am a coordinator at Independence First, and I do support groups. I work with people one-on-one, and I also do workshops in high schools.
Thank you. Gerald?
Hi, my name is Gerald Hay. I am the Independent Living Services Program Manager for Independence First. So I oversee and help schedule a lot of the programs that we offer. So whether that's in the schools, home access, outreach, those types of things. So a little bit all over the place with me, but all for the agency roles.
Thank you guys so much for coming in for today. I don't know if Myra, if you're just going to be a listener or if you would like to have any input where we're just going around introducing ourselves. This idea to do this interview with Independent First really just came in honor of the disability rights being signed on July 26 in 1990. And we just wanted an opportunity to create communities together so they can learn about maybe different struggles or celebrate identities and such. So just to start off, for people that don't really know Independent First, can you tell me a little bit about Independence First?
Brian?
Gray, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Sorry for that. So Independence First, we are an independent living center, and actually that is a federal designation. Through the Rehabilitation Act, ILCs were created to provide different services and programs for folks with disabilities. And basically, as an independent living center, we are a consumer-controlled, community-based, cross-disability, non-residential, nonprofit agency that is designed and operated for people in the community by people with disabilities. As part of our federal role, over 51% of our staff are persons with disabilities, 51% of our executive management team, and 51% of our board of directors are actually mandated to be people with disabilities, because we really believe in that that peer role, that shared lived experience. So that's really kind of central to our philosophy of, helping people live in the way that they choose and maintaining their independence. We are one of 8 independent living centers in Wisconsin. We are part of a coalition, so we all kind of act in concert, providing a lot of the same services. Some of those differ, but we do act in concert. So all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin are covered by an independent living center.
That is amazing. I do like the idea, the fact that you brought up that it is cross disability, because I do feel like sometimes people in public perception have a limited idea of what it is like to be an individual with disabilities. And this is a question for anyone to answer. Do you feel like people actually do have a limited perception on disabilities and they group everyone together?
Yeah, just for me, definitely. Like any of our roles in society. So whether that's gender or ethnicity or any of these types of things, our society tends to put people in different boxes. So even when we're talking about disability, people might automatically think, oh, that's somebody in a wheelchair, or that's one thing or another. So it's really important to kind of, when we're doing outreach, just kind of explain like what we're talking about and make it that it isn't just one particular thing, or that it's really about the individual, because again, that experience can look radically different, whether it's where you're from, where you live, how old you are, or all these different factors that can mean different things to different people. But we really want to get into that it is, about the individual, and not necessarily. One of the things about us is the independent living movement is not about diagnoses. So it's not about a medical, a doctor saying that you have this or this. It's really about looking at what you need to do to maintain your independence in whatever way, shape, or form that looks like. And then again, just the way our society, just kind of shorthands a lot of different things, it can definitely have an effect.
And I would agree with Gray. And it's, for me, it's different due to the fact that I was a person that was quote unquote born without a disability, and I obtained my disability through a gunshot. So even after being shot, only thing I knew about disabilities was dealing with people with spinal cord injury. But then once I started working in Independence First, you run into all these other things. The biggest one that I ran into that I didn't know much about was like autism, because I was working with kids in these support groups. And even though the kids had autism, all of them behaved differently. It wasn't the same in every situation. And even with spinal cord injury, I have friends that I play wheelchair rugby with, and we're diagnosed with the same spinal cord injury, but we all can do things differently. And because I'm an incomplete injury, like I have like abilities to feel in certain areas that certain can feel. So even though we're diagnosed with the same injury, we still are different in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. I completely understand that. Oh, I don't know if you want to speak, Brian. Go ahead.
Yes, please. For many people in the community, when they think of a person with a disability, they do think of people with disabilities that you can see. Obviously, if someone is using a wheelchair, we can see that. But for someone like myself who's deaf, I don't have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant. You may be walking along the street and just view me as a person who has all abilities until you see me signing or you realize that I can't hear. So I think that's really exposing people to those invisible disabilities as well, and educating people about the disability world.
100%. I completely agree. I was just going to say that I think, when people have a limited scope, it really invalidates every single person's experience. And although, like Harvey was saying, that it might be the same diagnosis on paper, but lived experiences, things can be completely different per person. Do you feel that, and this is also a general thing, that you find most places in Milwaukee accessible?
This is Brian. Milwaukee is an old city. They have a lot of older buildings, and so it's very difficult to make those buildings accessible. New buildings are required by law to provide that accessibility. Buildings that have been renovated are required to make their facilities accessible as possible. So there have been improvements over time, but unfortunately, there are still many facilities and buildings that are unaccessible in Milwaukee. Older apartments, single family homes are not often accessible and never will be because there is no law that would require a single family home to be built in an accessible way.
But even on top of that, with what Brian's saying, I mean, there's new buildings and new things that go up and they're still not accessible. And it's just the simple fact that I think
Right.
in general, society doesn't, even with all the laws passed and whatever, I mean, you can look at it in the same way that we're looking at inequality with whether it's the LGBT community, Black Lives Matter. Society really doesn't care. If you really want to look at it and say, to be honest, they don't care. And especially when it's capitalism and corporate America, they're doing what's best for society and what the gains are and what they're going to see in the future. They don't, everything else falls in line. Then you have to go and protest and make different laws and take action for them to correct something. If you do it right in the first place, all this other stuff doesn't matter. And that's one of the things I keep telling everybody with all like the Black Lives Matters and like the ADA and the protests. I mean, if our government was doing our job, there would be no reason for any of this.
Well, and that's one of the important things, and one of the big misconceptions with a lot of folks in the public is that ADA is somehow like a building codes law, or that it's building standards. And, you know, we talk about ADA guidelines, and really where the ADA really originated was in the civil rights movement. Because if you think about it, say just, you know, we have elections coming up, and, you know, if my polling place has 15 steps for me to get up, well, now it's not a building code issue. It's I cannot vote if I can't make it up those steps. So really what the ADA is, and there are standards to it, or there are measurements that are to help promote that accessibility, but it's really talking about, you know, people's access to, you know, goods and services in the community, and their, you know, their civil rights. And, you know, speaking to Brian and Harvey's points, when we talk about the ADA, or when we talk about accessibility, if you think about even, you know, my example just with the 15 stairs, well, you know, if, you know, during a bright summer Wisconsin day, you know, those stairs are fine when you're younger, or if you're not carrying anything. But if you are carrying children or groceries up those stairs, it turns into something else. If we are talking about those same stairs in November when it's snow and ice, so even though you might not have any mobility challenges per se, or, you know, needs, those stairs are still a barrier. So, you know, a lot of the things that we stress with like accommodations and accessibility is, you know, the right tools, and that good design works for everybody. You know, so whether I'm in a wheelchair or whether I'm pulling my children in a stroller, curb cuts are a good thing. You know, ramps are a good thing because they work for everybody. So it's really kind of a key thing, like when we're talking to folks about the ADA, just to kind of change that perception, because it isn't just a glorified building code. It's for inclusion in society, and, you know, those rights.
Yeah, completely. I remember, I think it was 2018 or 2019. I'm not sure. It was that a severe winter, the vortex, and you know, like the snow would be put on the sidewalks, and there would be students that wouldn't even be able to get to class because the snow was piled up. I mean, people that are able bodies can walk around and maneuver, but it was difficult with people like in wheelchairs. And it for me to see that like visually happening made me aware of architecture and how many things, like how many so many buildings don't have ramps or don't have accessible doors, or are not really taking into consideration where things are placed. And I think if every single one of us really truly thought about the impact of just how simple architecture can be, then it can make a difference. But it is a privilege to not worry about that personally. When places are not accommodating, how does that make you feel?
Well, if it'd be okay. So here's where the conversation is about to go awry. Let me be, because I look at things differently, I think, than a lot of people, and I don't always like playing victim.
Be as honest as you can. This is what this is for.
Well, fuck it. A lot. Like depending on the place that I go, it makes a difference on how upset I am about a situation. So I'm a sports fan. I'm originally from Chicago. So me and my sister, she travels down from San Diego in the summertime, and we go to Cubs games. And like when it comes to baseball, I can go to Miller Park by myself. Totally. I use a wheelchair and get around because Miller Park is really, really, really accessible. I cannot go to Wrigley Field by myself. First off, you got to push through Wrigleyville to get to Wrigley Field. And then even though once you get into Wrigley Field, they are very, very accommodating to make sure that you have everything you want. But it's irritating because here's in the big scheme of things. If you make everything accessible, it's not just easy for people with disabilities. It's much easier for people who don't have disabilities.
Mhm.
You imagine going into a mall and going to a store and everything is down lower. You don't have to reach up on a shelf to try to get things, or going into a mall where I got to maneuver through an obstacle course to get through all these clothes they got set up on these racks. They're like, oh, well, can you move this over? Can you move this over? And it's just like, it's common sense, but it's, I don't know. We live in a society full of mentally abused children, and we just, it's irritating because you would think in 2020 we wouldn't be going through the same thing that we were going through in the 60s and the 50s and so on, with all this technology and all this information. So.
Well, that's actually a huge point. You know, we're coming up on the anniversary of the ADA, and you think that after 30 years that we'd be, you know, that this shouldn't be a surprise, or, you know, that these design standards that we as a society would have been making these changes. And obviously there are going to be older buildings, or there's going to be, you know, geography that can't be, you know, easily, you know, done, but it's 30 years, you know, none of this should be a surprise, and it is the law of the land. And then, you know, the other thing, you know, kind of to Harvey's point is, you know, when we're out talking to, like, say, business owners, or you hear that, well, you know, I don't really have to do this because I've never had a person, you know, come to shop in a wheelchair. And it's like, well, maybe because your store isn't accessible, or, you know, those types of things. But what we want to do, and Brian can probably speak to this, but like for me, just personally, since working at Independence First, you know, obviously, like during COVID or any kind of, like, you know, government communications, you know, a lot of the announcements will actually have a sign language interpreter right on the dais next to whoever is speaking. And I am at the point now, like, where it is not shocking to see, like, oh, look, there's a sign language interpreter. Now it's shocking for me when I don't see one, which I'm hoping that, you know, as the younger folks are coming up, and as we're talking about, like, inclusion, that these exceptions are the shocking things, not that, you know, what is that person doing over next to the governor, you know? So I think we're moving in the right direction, but there's still so much, you know, so much work left to be done.
Yes, this is Brian. I have two perspectives on this issue. As someone who is deaf, it is frustrating when I can't access a building. If there's like an intercom system, or you have to talk through a speaker to be let in, I can't use that. So even if I push the button, I can't hear what someone is communicating to me. So I'm hoping that if I push the button, somebody will buzz me in, and then I'm able to communicate once I get in. So that's frustrating. Another hat that I wear is that of an ADA assessor. And so I go to several buildings and look at the accessibility and issues that may be there in barriers within a building. I also look for issues that impact people who have mobility issues, vision loss, who are deaf, hard of hearing. And one kind of new thing that I'm noticing more and more as I'm looking at perspective of people with developmental or cognitive disabilities is how clearly information is shared, and how easy it is for someone with that type of disability to figure out what they need to do or where they need to go in different areas in public places.
Completely. And I just wanted to, when you said that when you are communicating with people and addressing, let's just say, if a building isn't up to, you know, accessible rights, how has that been the response majority of the time?
If the person is not paying for the accommodation or the accessible barrier that needs to be removed, they're very willing to do it usually. But it's really kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people and how they can improve accessibility and working with people who have disabilities, but oftentimes they're very resistant. I notice sometimes that with older buildings, that when they do renovations, they're very excited about the fact that, you know, I'm excited about the fact that it's an older building, and hopefully with the renovations they'll be more accessible. And then they're almost to completion with the renovations and they're still not accessible. And so we do talk to the city about, you know, if this building has a permit to renovate, why are they not following the laws and the guidelines to make it accessible? And so then we have to approach the owner and find out, you know, what the hell they're thinking about and what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of hits close a little bit to home because I live on Prospect on a building that is extremely old. And although we have an elevator, to get into the building, we have about 7 stairs, but the elevator probably 80% of the time is not functioning. So that just makes me think of how I need to do my part to advocate for individuals with disabilities. So thank you for bringing that to me. I know that, oh, go ahead.
And I just want to mention too, apartment buildings and single family homes are not liable to comply with the ADA. So there is a little bit of a difference there.
Do you know why that is the case?
At the time the ADA was passed, it was there was already a federal Fair Housing Act for units of 4 or more to be accessible.
Okay, interesting.
So ADA does have some language that pertains to federal housing. Mm-hmm. Sorry, let me go back. I said that wrong, sorry. I just will state that there are some differences between federal housing and the ADA. It's probably I'm opening a can of worms if I get too much into it.
No biggie. I will do my own research on that. But thank you for bringing that to attention and that there is a difference to that. I know a big part of Independence First and people with disabilities is, you know, they have to deal with people constantly trying to always help them from a perspective that they don't feel like people with disabilities are independent. Do you often feel that you have to remind people that you can self-advocate or self-empower yourself?
Well, and Harvey can kind of speak a little bit more to this, but one of the things that that we find when we're working with folks, they're kind of surprised to find that they have, you know, and as shocking as it sounds, that they have certain rights or that they have these abilities that, you know, it's for too long that, you know, people have been making decisions for them or you know, setting these guidelines by, you know, whatever official policies are. So, you know, there is a little bit of that. And so, you know, encouraging people to be self-advocates, to be able to explain what their needs are. And, you know, it's been really huge. And especially for like the youth that, like, say, Harvey works with, you know, nobody's ever listened to me that way before, or nobody understood where I was coming from. Again, you know, going back to that peer model. But yeah, there is a little bit of that. And one of the things with, and I'll just end my little spiel with that, one of the big things with the independent living philosophy is just the right to fail. You know, so it's not necessarily that, you know, just because you're asking for something that you're going to get it, or just because you want something you're going to get it, but it's just that right to fail. Because a lot of the things that we talk about aren't performance-based, they're access-based. You know, if you can get into the room, then you can get that job, or, you know, if you can do that. So a lot of times it's really, I just want the right to fail and not to be told, well, that's really not for you, or, you know, women don't like to do this, or people with disabilities aren't interested in that. It's like, well, you don't really know that, and it should be the person who is, you know, kind of staking that. And I'll let other people speak to the rest.
And I guess, you know, speaking of that, and I personally, like when I first got injured, I was in the mindset of, well, first off, I couldn't move at all because to where the bullet is lodged in my neck, I should be dead. But because they stabilized it, I got like, and I'm incomplete. But I didn't think life was worth living when I first got injured. I wanted to die. I was like, what kind of life can I live being in a wheelchair, motorized wheelchair, on top of that at the time, and using a straw, they call it a sipping puff straw, to like move my chair around. And, you know, been in the hospital, and then, you know, you see people with disabilities, and I can admit that when I was up walking around that, you know, I made fun of people with disabilities, and I thought they were not as equal as people who didn't have disabilities. But then once I attained my disability, and I saw people who were either quote unquote more mobile than I was or less mobile than I was, and they were still living life. And I was asking myself, like, how are you all doing this? And like, what's the step that you all take? And then once you come to find out, it's like, I mean, if you what people in our society fail to realize is that perception is everything. You may have a goal or a perception of what happiness or what being successful is, but I might have a totally different goal than that. A person with a disability, happiness and successful may be just, oh, I want to be able to live on my own, do my own thing, and even if I don't have a job, to be able to be independent on my own. And when I was able to get to a point, I moved home. When I left the hospital, I moved in with my mother and my brothers and sisters. We all stayed in one house, and then we bought a house. And they helped me with a lot of stuff. But then I got to a point, they were helping me with stuff, and then I started getting a little better as time went on. Then, you know, you start back thinking and women find you attractive and you want to date. But it's kind of wild to have a girlfriend come over and you at home with your moms, and your mom still think that, oh, what does this girl want with you? You have this is literally what my mother used to say to me. You have a disability, no girl wants to date you. And I was like, what? So then she come barging in a room and stuff like that. So you get to the point of like, well, I'm able to do stuff on my own. And I just started putting myself in situations where I would test myself, like leave home and stay overnight with someone to test myself to see if I can do this. And it got to the point that I was able to move out on my own. Like the first night I moved out on my own, I slept in my own apartment by myself. And it was kind of scary, but then it was just like, you know, I had built up to this. And then when you see other people see you, like I go to the gym all the time. I go to the Wisconsin Athletic Club, and people see me in the gym working out. They always come over and say that you inspired me and this and that. And I sometimes get irritated by that because to me, it's saying that you see me and you say to yourself, you so messed up that if I was in your predicament, I don't know what I would do. But it's not that, it's just I'm doing what I would be doing if I was still up, quote unquote, walking around. So it's being independent, and for people, yeah, it is shocking to people, but I don't know, there's people walking around who don't even live whatever, quote unquote, great life, and they have all the ability in the world, and they need assistance. So it depends on what you call independence. And everybody needs support from everybody. Right now, we're giving each other support in this chat. So no one's doing anything by themselves.
Completely. And I also think, you know, what you were saying, that the example that you gave of having, you know, a person over, like a girl over, I think a lot of people also don't think that if you are a person with disabilities and you can't be in a relationship or have intimacy and things like that. That is definitely a misconception and a really unfortunate view of how people live their lives. For people that don't identify with being an individual with disabilities, how can we advocate for those who do?
Say that, what was the question again?
For people that do not identify as not having a disability, so able-bodied individuals, how can we advocate for those who are in the disability community? Or help advocate?
I think a lot of it comes from, you know, what we're trying to do in society as a whole. You know, we want our structures and our laws to work for everybody. So we want that equity piece. And when we say that, it has to be for everybody. We want access. And, you know, with the, you know, the COVID pandemic, this has been a huge highlight to, you know, what some of these issues. So, you know, maybe last year, a lot of businesses were like, well, we can't do anything remotely, or you can't work from home. But now, because we have to, we're finding out all of these different ways that we can. And for us in the independent living, you know, movement, it's about giving people the tools, whatever they are, you know. So just because we don't, you know, our society might say, well, we communicate this way, or these are the tools. Well, now we're kind of finding new tools and we're kind of making them work. Not necessarily to say that, you know, that this is going to work for everybody. I kind of shudder to the fact that, oh, now we can do everything virtually. For some folks, this doesn't work. Like for me, cognitively, this remote thing, it takes a lot more energy. And I don't know whether that's just because it's a lot easier to send like multiple emails than, you know, than not. But, you know, as we move forward and how we advocate is, you know, teaching everybody that, you know, whether you have a disability or not, we are all tool users. You know, so when we say, oh, you know, look at that person using that wheelchair. Well, you know, it might be about energy conservation, you know, like when you were out walking or playing golf. Well, you're using a golf cart because, you know, you're able to walk, but you're using that as an accommodation or as, you know, accessibility. So kind of getting people into that mindset to be like, oh yeah, you know, one of the examples that I use is we don't bat, pardon the pun, but we don't bat an eye about like people wearing glasses. Right. That's an assistive technology for folks. And, you know, we don't think about that, but certain things do carry that stigma. But really to, you know, if we're going to be good advocates, to be like, you know, doing what you do, you know, realizing that people do things in different ways, but then like looking at what we want our societies to be and kind of working towards that. Because again, it's not about diagnosis or anything like that. It's just about understanding that people do things in different ways. You know, if you want to have goats mow your lawn, rock on. If you want to have a riding lawnmower, rock on, but it's about getting your lawn cut. So, you know, just kind of getting into that mindset too, to be like, well, you know, like closed captioning is another, you know, good example. That isn't just for folks who have hearing loss or who are deaf. You could be using that, you know, to watch movies, you know, with, you know, in subtitles, but then also, you know, if your family's asleep, you might want to be able to put those on. So getting people to realize that a lot of these things that we think, oh, that's a disability item, it's really not. It's about a tool to make us, you know, or allow us to be better or more efficient or more comfortable. You know, any of the things that we do with computers, making text bigger, changing the screen brightness and all that, that's not a disability thing. That's just you need to do a job type of thing. So getting people into that mindset.
This is Brian. I think the best thing as an ally is to make sure that there are opportunities for people with disabilities to be involved, if we want to or if we don't want to. Let me give you an example. A lot of times I'll see advertisements or information about meetings and there's no contact information or no way for me to reach out to that organizer of the event to say, hey, you know, I'd like to participate in this meeting or event that you're having, but I need to request an accommodation. So there's no way for myself to do that, or if Harvey needed to make sure that there was an accessible restroom at the site. You know, so having that contact information and being ready to provide those accommodations if those requests come in. Also, thinking about building homes. You know, we talked about apartments and homes. Why not building it what we call visitability with a no-step entrance, so that someone with a disability could visit your home and be able to enter your home and partake in fellowship. I have no idea who you are in terms of who you work for as this radio station. I've never, you know, seen any of or heard any of your broadcasts. So possibly offering transcripts for people who can't hear your radio programs, but could maybe partake in it in a different way. They might be able to, you know, have better access and know what's going on and what kind of programs you offer.
Completely. You know, as an audio storyteller, I think about that a lot, and I think about that. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if it would be great to have live captions on the audio programs, but a transcript is another option.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me know, because that is definitely a suggestion that can definitely happen overnight for sure. I really do appreciate that. I do want to talk a little bit about discrimination. Has there been any moments where you felt you were discriminated solely based on your disability?
I would say yes. After my disability, and I took some time to get my stuff together and get out of depression, I went to school. I went to school at MATC first and got my associate's degree in human services. So after I got my associate's degree, I spent like 2 years looking for work. And there were a couple of job interviews I went on to look for work, and I was told they were gonna give me a call back. I didn't get a call back, and one of the job interviews I went on just so happened that the person that they gave the job to was my brother's baby's mother, who only thing she had was a high school diploma, nothing else. And she ended up getting the job. So I knew for a fact that they thought, and it was at a what would you call it? After school like program for high school students to come in and like help with the work and stuff at home. And I did an internship there for 6 months for school. Not 6 months. It was 6 weeks for school, and everybody there loved me or whatever. So everybody thought that when I interviewed for the job, I would get it, but I didn't. And I knew it was based around my disability because they probably thought that I wouldn't be able to handle the situation. And just so happened, working at Independence First, I do a lot of the same stuff when it comes to schooling. And the students and the teachers, for the most part, love me to death. So,
for the most part,
yeah, you know what happened.
Well, you're very personable, so I understand why there is that much love.
Thank you very much.
So when you do face discrimination, is there any advice that you can give or any insight of how you coped with it?
Ryan, you go first, because what I'm going to say might deter everything.
Pass that mic.
Okay, well, let me answer the previous question along with this. When I was younger, I used to work at a fast food restaurant, and I won't say which one, but it had golden arches. And, I thought that I had the ability to become a manager. So I did all the paperwork and all the classwork that was required to become a manager, and through that process, and it just seemed to me like I hit the glass ceiling. I thought that I had the ability to do it. I had the intent of doing that, but nobody else had the intent of allowing that to happen for me. And I ended up leaving the job. And again, this was shortly after the ADA had passed. So I had no idea what my rights were in terms of a person with a disability, that I could file a complaint. And so my advice to people who do experience discrimination would be, find out what your rights are. Find out what are the steps that you need to take to make sure that you can't be discriminated against, and educate yourself in that matter, because it's really important to know what you can and can't do.
And I guess when I encounter discrimination, it depends on the situation, because I've seen videos of people who encounter discrimination and they step forward to try to rectify the situation. And depending on the person you're dealing with or the people you're dealing with, that situation can turn bad. Like, especially when it comes to parking. Like, people abuse this parking for accessible parking on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like, I'm not afraid of addressing anything, but I also realize that I'm in a situation where there are not, my ego is still the same size it was before I got injured. And I have to remember that sometimes, like, oh, well, you just can't go into kind of every situation. But no, some situations can be addressed. And then other times you got to go in, depending on where you are and whatever you is, you can go in and talk to the people who own whatever facility you're at and address the situation. Or, you know, there's apps out now about certain like parking situations you can deal with apps that you can report certain things. But a lot of times it's just like, if people who quote unquote don't have disabilities would You know, Brian used the word ally, and a lot of people are using that word these days, especially with the Black Lives movement. Well, you're our ally, and we don't have allies. We are human beings at the end of the day. If we start treating each other that way, and if somebody who quote unquote doesn't have a disability or whatever sees someone that has a disability being wronged or whatever, or just join in and just have a conversation with whoever. Like, listen, can we do this and do that, and have these real conversations? And a lot of this stuff can be rectified just through us treating each other as human beings, not as a person that is quote unquote black, quote unquote white. At the end of the day, we bleed the same blood, and we all can help each other in any shape, form, or fashion. And so, to address the situation, yeah, learn about the laws in the ADA and make sure that you yourself are abiding by those rules, but just treat each other like human beings, and all this stuff will come to an end at some point.
Yeah, treat each other like human beings. That is solid advice that I think a lot of times people just don't take, or they forget the things they learned in kindergarten and such. But I do agree with you on the term of like ally. Sometimes I have problems with that because I feel like people use it as a boost, like a self boost for themselves. Yeah, or I've even heard of things like ally fatigue, which is with being an ally. So I understand the concept of that. Also, it is exhausting to constantly, you know, self-advocate or have that emotional tax on you to explain situations and things like that. So I completely understand. What is something that all of you guys wish people just understood about your individual experience?
Wait a minute. Say that like Cole said. Like when you ask that question, like when you say into like what, like in what detail, like individual experience pertaining to what?
Just your experience being a person with a disability. I feel like people don't typically understand what that means, or what is like one thing that you wish people would understand or try to look at a certain perspective.
It's to answer that question, and for me to answer that question honestly, it's almost impossible to answer that question because our society has totally warped our ability to look at any situation and take it on and understand it, like understand it completely, due to the fact that we have labeled everything. We have made everything so it's this or it's that. And in life, think about people with disabilities or people with whatever, what is the color of your skin. People always wants to choose sides. You're either on this side or you're on that side. In the big scheme of things, the truth and honesty is all right in it. There's always areas of shades of gray. And the truth always lies within that shade of gray instead of being on both sides. So what I would say, and I'm not gonna say this is the honest to God truth, but what I would want people to realize is that when you see me, don't look at my disability first. Look at me as a person. And one of the greatest things that ever happened to me since I've been having a disability is that there was a kid, he was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I was at the Pettit Center. And I was just doing some exercise, pushing around for rugby. And the kid walked over to me, asking me about like what's wrong with me, what happened. His mother stopped him. And I told her, I was like, don't stop him. Let him ask questions. I swear to you, I had the most in-depth conversation I had ever had with anybody, with this 5-year-old boy, asking me all these questions, how I got injured. He was a Caucasian kid, and this and that. And I think his mother like literally learned something from the conversation also. We sat there and had this conversation, and when we were done, she thanked me. And I was like, don't thank me, thank your son, and thank yourself for allowing this conversation to happen. And kids understand situations way more than adults do. that I've come to find out, because they haven't been ruined by society totally yet with all these things that you shouldn't be doing, and this is what it is and this is what it isn't. So
I mean, it goes back to your point of, so sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
Right, I'm sorry too.
No, that's okay. I don't think it's really possible for someone to fully understand what it's like to be a person with a disability. It's a unique life experience, and I wish people would realize how much more work it is for us just to do the same basic daily things that people do. For example, if I want to go to the movie theater, I have to check and make sure that the movie will have a captioning device available. I've had problems where I call and I tell them I'm going to be coming in, I want to watch this movie, I want to make sure that the device is there, that you have it fully charged and ready to go before I show up, so that when I get there, I can get everything ready, get the device set up. And it's not ever in the same place where you just walk in and buy tickets. I have to go to a special area. So I have to go get the device, I have to sit down, I have to turn it on. 50% of the time there's something wrong with it. It's either not working or it's not fully charged. And then the movie starts, and I don't know any of this until the movie actually starts, because most of the ads and the previews of movies that happen before the movie actually starts don't have captioning. So I don't know if the movie isn't going to be captioned or I have a problem with the device until the movie actually starts. Then I have to get up and I miss the beginning of the movie and go find an attendant to come and work out the problem for me. So my just movie experience is very different than somebody who can hear or doesn't have a disability. So just the simple things that I think people maybe take for granted are very difficult for sometimes people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just so many extra barriers. Completely, yeah. Something that I honestly don't even think about a lot of the time. Like my focus is getting the ticket, getting popcorn, and finding a seat, and not worrying about things like captions. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's why a lot of people who are deaf prefer to go to an open caption movie, because then the captions are on the screen. We don't even have to worry about a special device and if it's going to work. It's just much, much easier, a more equal experience.
Yeah, just why not have all movies with captions then? It seems like such an easy fix that all people.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Magic.
Yeah, sometimes it's the easiest solutions that people just don't do. It boggles my mind.
Yeah, even things like the captioning devices can be a barrier. For example, you could have a really cool captioning device like glasses that you can wear that have captions. They're wonderful for me, but another person who is deaf can't really focus on the captions and the screen at the same time. So sometimes assistive technology, one device will work for one person, but it won't work for the next. So it's always interesting.
Yeah, and that goes back to our beginning of the conversation, how every single person has a different experience and it's not the same diagnosis, and that we should not think about that in that way of a diagnosis first. I did want to go onto one concept right before we end this, and that is the concept of masculinity. And this is open to anyone. Have you ever felt that you had struggled or maybe overcome that struggle of what masculinity means? What does that look like? Being an individual with a disability, does that conflate with the identity of being a man? Have you had to go over like physical or psychological barriers to overcome and fully be in tune with your identity? Yeah, it's a big question. I know.
This is the most, like, oh my God. So I find this to be a hysterical question. And Gray can attest to what I'm about to say. When I first got injured, I thought my masculinity would be in question. Me being a man and what a man is, quote unquote, what society says a man is supposed to be or what he's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've come to find out is that people react to how you act towards them. And what I found out, masculinity is not a physical thing when it comes to men. It's an attitude. It's the way you behave. I have so many people say to me that I intimidate them. And I laugh about that because I say to myself, I'm in a goddamn wheelchair. What intimidates you about me? And they say, Harvey, the way you speak, your tone, the way you respond to things. And I'm literally taken back by that. This is even with other men who are intimidated by. So I used to think that, but I've come to the realization that even when it comes to women, women are attracted to people's personality, the way they carry themselves. And I find myself telling other guys who have disabilities that if you act a certain way or you perceive yourself a certain way, that's exactly how society and other people are going to treat you. Your disability has absolutely nothing to do with your personality and the way you come off to people. Now, if you allow it to, it will. But I don't see myself any different from any other man that I encounter in my lifetime, regardless if they're walking around or they're not. I don't put myself in a different order than they do. I don't give them any extra because they are walking around. Now, has there been a challenge in my life? Yes, it has. But just me encountering people and dealing with my disability for so long and also running into people. Like I can say one thing about Brian and Gray, and they allow me to be who I am. They don't, even as men, they don't like, oh, look at Harvey, this and that. They support me in all of my endeavors and whatever we do at work. So, but no, your masculinity I think is literally based around how you see yourself in the society as a person.
Yeah. And like the concepts of masculinity and femininity are social constructs. So we make those descriptions and norms as well. Can I ask, is it something that you have fully overcome, or is it like a constant thing that you have to keep reinforcing? I feel like growth for me personally is never ending.
Oh Lord, did you just answer the question?
Yeah.
No, it's not. I've not mastered it. It is something that I'm constantly like dealing with because society changes the goal, like moves the goalpost all the time. They are like they are told they just keep moving it on what it should be. So you find yourself like, okay, do I have to tweak this so now that I'm not offending someone or that I'm living up to what this masculinity is supposed to be and what it shouldn't be? And even with that, I can honestly say I have had to deal with changing my ideas about how I feel about people in the LBGT community. I've come from, I grew up in a community that was mostly based around African Americans, and African Americans have an idea about the LBGT community that is a little bit different than other communities. I can say that. I have friends to this day that dear friends of mine, we had these conversations about people with sexuality and masculinity. And when I talk to them, my ideas have changed totally about those communities. And it's because I have allowed myself to engage and work with people who sexuality may be different from what I was taught or believed in. So but it doesn't change me as a person. And just because you have friends and you engage, it doesn't, but it goes right back to the whole thing of being fucking human beings and being a humanitarian and caring about each other. What floats your boat may not float my boat, but it still doesn't take away from you being a goddamn human being and me caring about you and you caring about me and me being able to support you and you being able to support me in life. So I don't know what masculinity really is in this day and form and what it should be. I have no, it's me being, I don't know, a human being and treating another person the way I want to be treated. So.
Well, and I think to that point, like when we're talking about like just with youth perspective, so Harvey and I are of a certain age, well, and Brian too, we're all of a certain age where, you know, those gender roles were a little bit more fixed or that this is the way you're supposed to be. But, you know, like when we're talking about like inclusion or representation, I think that, you know, say what you want about like social media or like that, that I think that the representation helps out because it's very valuable to see that there's other people that are like you, or that there's more than one way to be a man or to be a woman, or, you know, to express masculinity or femininity. And whether that's occupationally, you know, that it's okay for, you know, one of the things Independence first started an e-gaming league, and, you know, that's highly gendered to younger male audiences, but we have a lot of, you know, women and young girls showing up because of their disability. Well, people with disabilities don't play video games, but then also, well, girls don't like that. And I think that as we move forward, just generationally, and, you know, with that representation just constantly being a struggle, but constantly improving, I think that really helps out. And just for me personally, you know, growing up the way I did, and then, you know, having family members in the Marine Corps and, you know, like all that. So coming from, you know, that era, I didn't view it as toxic towards me, you know, developmentally, but then also, you know, on the other sides of the family, you know, we had the poets and the writers and the, you know, the musicians where, you know, that was definitely not the Marine Corps side, but then, you know, the mom's side was more that artistic thing. So again, with that representation, it's all that, you know, there are different ways that you can express that, but, you know, unfortunately our society, you know, definitely kind of takes that pigeonhole, well, you're not this or you're not that, and it's snap judgment type of thing. But overall, it's encouraging not only for people in the, you know, the disability community, but then just generally, as Harvey would say, as fucking human beings, that representation is kind of changing, or even if it's not changing in the, you know, the broader society or the broader culture, the you know, the people that might be marginalized are able to find each other, you know. So we might not be where we want to be, but we're not alone when we're doing it. So, and I think that that's a huge piece, because it gives people just kind of either the time to kind of figure things out, or, you know, just to be able to say, you know what, if you don't have the answers right now, it's okay. You know, you don't have to have that. And I think that that's huge. And I think it's very encouraging. But, you know, obviously we're still not there yet on any of these things. But, you know, these conversations have been being had, you know, for 3,500 years, since the ancient Greeks were talking about it, you know. So, you know, these aren't necessarily novel concepts, but I think that, you know, we're getting to the point representationally and with our expectations. And again, you know, what might have been acceptable to me, Harvey, and Brian, you know, growing up, kids today are pretty much like, yeah, no, that's not the way it's going to be. And especially we see that around issues of gender, you know, going to that, like, where, you know, for me, I mean, even me now, it's odd if I look at a board of directors and I don't see women or people of color. To me, that's the oddity. And I think that's where we want to be, like, where it's not, you know, that people are asking those questions. But like I said, I kind of take heart in the youth of today, you know, by saying that, you know, that these things aren't okay, or that they, you know, we kind of talk about, like with the ADA, you know, like some of the people that we work with have never known a time before the ADA, you know, or the civil rights movement. You know, we have people that, you know, that we work with who have never not had the right to vote, but then it's like, well, you know, you got to listen and you got to do that. But I think it's encouraging for them because, you know, they've never not had that right. If you try to take that right away from them, that's not going to happen. So I think that, you know, that's a huge thing. So, yeah, so kind of a roundabout way on the masculinity and femininity thing, but I think that representation issues are definitely helping out.
Say something, Brian, please.
You don't have to if you.
Something.
There we go. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I am technically part of Gen Z, although I emotionally and mentally don't feel that I fit in. But representation is completely important. From my own personal experience as a Middle Eastern woman, I can tell you how seeing someone that looks like me, has the same belief, lived my same experience on a TV screen, on a book, on social media, in government, really makes me feel like I can do anything. And I'm like, when we see people like us aspiring and living the lives that we can, then it is one step closer for self-advocacy as well. Maddy, is there anything that you would like to add? I always say it that way.
I just really appreciate all of you being open and honest and allowing me to be here and to just sit and listen. I think that I do a lot of events at Radio Milwaukee, and now I'm doing them virtually, and it's given me a lot to think about in terms of accessibility of my events. So I sincerely appreciate each of you being here. So thank you for allowing me to listen.
Speaking of events, I work with two other amazing people, and we organized the first accessible Black Lives Matter protest march, and we have something that's coming up this Sunday. I actually shared it on you all's page just a few minutes ago. The ADA 30th anniversary / Black Lives Matter protest march that we're doing this Sunday. So if anybody wants, we're going to make sure that it is coronavirus friendly. People wearing masks, and we got meds set up, and we're sharing masks and all that stuff. So if anybody's interested in coming out, it's this Sunday. So and all the logistics of everything is shared in the post that I shared with you all. So feel free to share on your social media and come out and join us. In that, we're going to be talking about the ADA and a lot of stuff that we talked about today. So if you want to come out, feel free.
Absolutely, of course. And I do also want to second what Maddy said. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to ask questions. I know sometimes, when I was thinking about things to ask, it was that little worry that I think a lot of people do is like, I don't know if this is appropriate to ask or if I'm wording this correctly. So I do appreciate the conversation and allowing me to just have a conversation. I feel like I learned a lot, and it's giving me an outlet to continue my learning and to also really internally reflect on maybe biases that I didn't know I had, or problematic behavior or attitudes and such. But I did want to open the floor if any one of our participants would like to add anything before we close off.
I mean, one thing I would say is that there's no such thing, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Maybe. But when it comes to like situations dealing with people with disabilities, racial injustice, I mean, if you sit back and you are afraid to ask a question and you don't, what ends up happening is you end up missing out on an answer to your question, whether you agree with that answer or you don't. You should always ask the question, like even with this interview or whatever. No, if there's anything that you may have left out, you or Maddy or whatever, and you think that it might have been inappropriate, no such thing. No, ask the question. The biggest, I thoroughly enjoy doing workshops with middle school and high school students because they don't have filters, and they ask all the questions that quote unquote adults are afraid to ask. They think that I want to answer them, and I answer them. They're like, "Oh, I didn't think you were going to answer." I'm like, "Why wouldn't I?"
Yeah, I mean, completely. I think a lot of us are scared of making mistakes, but mistakes are learning opportunities. So I completely agree. And if a workshop is happening soon with your middle school or high school students, although it might be virtually, please let me know. We'd love to participate in that or see how that goes. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
of course.
This is Brian. I think that it's important for people to remember that people with disabilities are people. That means we have different beliefs, we have different likes, and I'm always shocked by the fact that, when I look up information on the election statistics, I find out that people with disabilities generally in politics, some are Democrat, some are Republican, so it varies. I mean, it's almost the same percentage as the general population. And I really think that more were liberal than conservative. But it's been a really interesting learning experience for me to understand that, we all have differences and we all have different views and likes and dislikes. And we're all from different communities, but at a base level, there's going to be similarities because we are all people. And I've learned a lot from the conferences and that I've attended, and learning about race and disability and how they really are intertwined.
Completely. Well, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your Friday. I really did enjoy meeting you guys all virtually. Yeah, this will be up on Monday, and I will send you guys an email with all the information. But I do hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
First.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.